Well, let's talk about overworking for Eric. Let's have a conversation uh, about something that everybody's run into. Not going to be much of a picture fest on this one. This is really going to be just a conversation. Eric says, thank you for another great video filled with practical information. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on overworking a piece. I know personally I've ruined many works by overworking. Sometimes a painting feels that it becomes more and more fragile as it progresses. Also, your thoughts of a general rub-in versus a more accurate start reminds me of playing darts. You don't creep up on a bullseye, but shoot for it right away. Of course, it requires more skill and practice. Yeah, you're being hinted at, aren't you? Your question, you're already having an idea about what part of the answer is to that question, Eric. But overworking a piece, I'd put it this way, just to start out. In a sense, there's no such thing as overworking unless it looks overworked. In other words, I think I liked what Daniel Green once said, when it's hanging on the wall, it doesn't matter how long it took. So what's overworking? Unless it looks overworked. Now, then on the other hand, you have Tarbell saying, I don't trust a picture where you can't see where the artist went a little wrong, where the painter went a little wrong. So interesting stuff, huh? Now, I've looked at paintings by Paxton, for example, over time, and those paintings are very, very beautiful in their shapes and in their color and all those sorts of things. But it's not infrequent that you'll see a ridge right at a joint where he's painted it over and over and over again. And at the point that it starts building up and becoming an obnoxious sight, or rather unsightly, as a blob, as a thickening, so that when you look at it from the side, you can actually see the surface jumping up. At that point, it begins to be a little bit, unpleasant to the viewer. And it begins to look like the guy was challenged in a way that, well, let's put it this way. When you have an actor working on the stage, you want him to look like there's nothing to it. You want it to look easy, right? So that's the kind of thing that overworking can have in it as a component, in my way of seeing things. So that's a craft thing, though, right? So a painting should always, and by the way, it's also a mentality thing. So a painting, however much work you put in, should look easy, should look like it was blown on. I think that's one of those things that Sargent has in spades, that he doesn't show the effort, right? It doesn't look like labored is the right word, right? Overworking, labored, now you're talking about something that's problematical, right? But what does it mean to be overworking a piece? Now, let's talk about it from a different angle. And that is, what's your goal in a painting? Because one of the problems I see in students, and had certainly myself, I would just keep working and working, adding more and more dotting of I's and crossing of T's, because I had no end in sight except every teeny tiny little detail, right? Because I didn't have a concept of what made the mystery and magic, and I didn't know when I had arrived. So all we were left with is students, and that's what you've got to be referring to, isn't it, Eric? When you're a student, that's your job, actually, is to manage a picture all the way to the nth degree of detail. You might say whatever it takes. And then you look at that painting and you say, dang, whoa, that's really beaten on and chewed up and all this stuff. You find yourself, for example, going into an area to add more details, and you're messing up more than you're helping. That's where you could easily, too, talk about the idea of the fragile nature. One of the things I see in my students for some time is that they don't know that as they get closer to the end, the corrections are smaller and smaller. If you're still correcting big things at the end, which can happen, by the way, but if you're still correcting them at the end, you weren't in the right place at the beginning. You see what I mean? So your job at the beginning, in the early phases of a painting, is to get big things really, really well. And I'm talking about in every which way, the big effects, the big shapes, the great forms, that's my idea of a start, is all about having all the great things really well organized as a platform for any level of more stuff that we may wind up putting in. But so that might be thought to be, you could easily say that's a student dilemma, but the part of what makes it a student dilemma or anybody's dilemma is when you don't have a goal in sight, when you don't know, when you haven't. Anyway, I'm talking now as an impressionist. So if you look at nature in front of you, and you actually look long enough until you begin to see where the magic lies, and what it is essentially you're going to be communicating, and you will know at that point when you're done, and you won't push it past that point. Now we could talk about the idea. You bring the subject up of also your thoughts of a general rub-in. Well, the rub-in idea, especially a generalized rub-in, you just lose a surface. You lose a layer of surface. And so your painting is already going to have fewer skins to work with. And what happens in these extra skins as you add more and more color is, like, for example, in the darks, you can lose the vibrancy of the color in the darks. It was a conversation, I think, in Collier's book on portrait painting. He talks about having to get the life back in a black robe of a judge's robe or something. And he said he had to actually put down white again and lay the black over it. And I've done that, and it's actually one of those things you may have to do. But that's one of those things that happens when you're just painting and painting and painting and painting, and as you say, not going straight for it, right? So in every way, the more you just treat the thing with, oh, we can get that later, oh, we can get that later, you're going to run into more of that kind of problem, that specific type of problem. So it is better, and that's why I say I think you really are on target when you say shoot for it right away, shoot for the bullseye right away. So you're hearing those sorts of things are the ones that cause the sort of the burden, right? What else? The general rub-in. So that's the general rub-in thing. But so the mentality of Ang was make it as like as you can the first time, and then make it more like. So that's your darts. You aim straight for the bullseye every single time, and you don't just throw toward the target a little bit. Right, you actually have to build in that. By the way, I can tell you a funny story. We were when I was a student in Boston. We were of a boring night want to go off to a candlepin bowling alley. I'd never even heard of candlepin before, and it was nicer, but it was nicer for the ladies because the balls weren't this big old monster things, and which I even thought a little, shall we say, heavy-handed. But the balls were small, but the pins were small too. They're just vertical. They weren't built big fat bellied pins. So they're candle shaped. And I remember at that, going up there and just saying, well, what's this about? Now I was already on to trying to figure out painting, right? So here I am trying to figure out bowling with candle pins. But I do remember just going up there and saying, well, let's just throw the ball. Let's just go up there and see what's going on. And so you go up there and you throw the ball and you find out a bunch of your shots are going into the gutter and and you have no idea. So you start saying, well, what should I be doing? And you realize that there's things like, for example, when I was releasing the ball from my hand, I noticed I was torquing my hand a little bit to correct something. So I figured out maybe I should be walking in a different way toward the, what they call addressing the target as a turning of your body to face it in a certain way. And I realized then that I should use my whole arm and get the whole arm moving in the right direction, addressing the target, right? And I found that more and more I didn't have to rely on my hand. But the last thing that came to me was to actually look, and I'm coming from a myopic point of view, right, which will be my next video. And I was looking generically sort of toward the target. And finally I realized I needed to decide where I was trying to hit on the 10 pin sitting in front of me, what part of the target. And that changed everything, right? Then I began to realize what these parts are, plus the idea of really making your point, knowing what the point is when you do all this other preparatory, whatever, all these other exercises, disciplines you've got. And so I really am with you on that, and that really is a big piece of this. Now, what I started saying at the beginning was that overworking is a matter of appearances, right? So if you stay on that idea, that you'll learn to, for example, and maybe look at this. I brought a painting in mind here. It's not a special one. In some ways, it's awkward in some ways, perhaps, but it's a good one to look at with this idea in mind. But for example, what you want it to do, we use a word like blown on. You want the places, points of interest like this, not to look struggled with. Just say something like that, or a spot like this, or wherever there's an event, you want it to look like it was, the word is blown on, right? You want it to look easy. Because the eye, first of all, the eye is going to go there. Now, so one of the strategies you take then is painting out and painting in. You push your lights out and you draw it again. If you screw it up, you don't go in there and start pecking and poking at it and beating the hell out of it, so to speak. So if you follow that idea, you have to learn to paint out, to take the beautiful color that's there and push it out and redraw that edge with the darks, et cetera, right? So you have to, there's some of those things like painting out and then drawing wet to wet again are a significant part of this. That's another part of it is drawing parts, learning how to draw parts, and yet being able to unify them as if they were painted all at once. So this an area like these grapes, that area was definitely not, it was painted all at once, but if you blow your eye, you would have seen some red to dark generalizations, and you would have seen some drawing maybe here or some other odd location, where place table setters and that sort of thing. So this is done with multiple skins, and at some point, each of these things has to be drawn, as it were, by itself, right? So there's obviously a way to go at it that's like what people presume about Sargent. You can just paint this out over and over again, paint the whole thing over and over again, with that idea of getting that look like it was just, everything is just magically tied on as paint goes. But you can learn to paint a passage, any part of this thing. And I paint in visual order, so I'm always painting the significant parts. And then as I decide I want something else inside there, like a reflected light, I have to make that happen too. So if you want to revisit the video about wet and dry joints and that sort of thing, that might be helpful for you. But the one thing you want to look like, though, is that it was always just a little bit easy, like you didn't work hard. And I don't mean to say that you didn't. Well, first of all, I don't mean to say that you didn't work hard, but you don't want people to see that it looks labored and struggled with, and even they could do that. What you want to do is have it look a little bit magical, so it looks like maybe the person looking at it might think, wow, I wonder how they did that, That's something you've run into, I'm sure. There's magic in a lot of paintings, and academic and impressionist. What I'm painting here, this is by the way, I call this impressionist, but it isn't broken colors and blobbiness and all that sort of stuff kind of thing. But it is impressionist in the sense of the entire world is visually related and truthful to each, and all the elements are truthful to each other, the relationships of things. So, but you can see that this one's pushed a certain amount of detail, but I've accomplished my mission without writing each letter on the book or the other books. I've accomplished the mission of what I find to be the big beauty of this thing. I'll defend myself, by the way, by saying this reproduction the blues are a little bit, forward. They're a little bit too strong. By the way, now that I can tell what your monitor is going to look like. So you do have to learn some ways of making marks that look like that, and even if you have to paint it 4 times. But the other thing you want to learn to do is try to get all the data in as few skins as possible. So 3 to 5 would be a good maximum. As I said, in the darks, in any dark anywhere, it's very easy for it to start going inky. And inkiness, by the way, isn't just a question of black, but it can just be colorlessness. It just stops having vibrancy. Colorless, I mean that it's chromal, that the color isn't coming through the dark very well. And I don't mean that it should come through the dark when it doesn't, but when it's supposed to be there and present as a color value, as a shadow with color. Because remember, if a shadow doesn't have color in it, it won't have its atmospheric qualities, apart from just being flat, which is a factor. So let's see if there's anything else I can think of. Let's look at your question again, as I always do, right? Thank you. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on overworking a piece. I know personally I've ruined many works by overworking. Again, think in terms of, do you know what the destiny is of this painting? You're always going to be overworking it, in my view, if you're ambitious and prideful and all that sort of stuff about getting every little detail. By the way, that every piece you put into a painting should be there for a reason, and the reason, the good reason, isn't because it was there. There's got to be an aesthetic reason. There's got to be a reason based on the compositional necessities. So keep that in mind as well. But because otherwise you're just painting what would be the equivalent of a photograph, by one of those photographers, just sets the camera down there until everything is noodled to the nth degree, as it were, right? But you can see nature that way. You can say, well, that's the beauty of this picture, and that's your decision. But I'm going to suggest to you that when you're looking at the vista of the world outside there, and when you begin to get into the rhythms of the color relations and the shape play and all that sort of stuff, and you realize what's making for the beauty of this moment, right? You won't need to pursue and pursue and pursue. And there's no what's the right word? It's not quite pride. That's not quite the word we're looking for. It's you know what it is? It's like being a good kid. You're just gonna be a nice good boy, good girl. You're gonna do everything. Painting's a funny thing that way, right? That's not the game. That's not the game we're in. Your job is to say is to blurt out rather about the magic in front of you, and just make a single point effectively. If you see what I mean. Now, don't take that literally, because there are frequently more than a single point. But you have this essential beauty when you're looking at nature as an impressionist, and you're saying, what is it? What is it? What is it? And the longer you look, the more you'll know what it is. As I've said before, it's like you're looking at somebody whose face you want to remember. You just met this great guy or gal, and you're just looking at that person, hoping you won't forget what they look like, knowing you won't see that person for 3 months, but you want to remember them, right? If you can look at nature like that, then you watch your canvas as you paint, and keep looking to recognize that beauty on the canvas, learning to recognize it. And that's when you can see a guy like Benson. Why he stops when he does is because he's already reached that point where, yes, that's why he came. And that's one of those things that'll keep you from overworking a painting. So keep those things in mind. Okay, so sometimes a painting feels more and more fragile as it progresses. That can be the case. That definitely can be the case. By the way, depending on how you apply paint, you can wind up with cracking issues and all kinds of stuff. So the fewer the layers, the better. Goes with that thought. So, but I think that's largely it. Let's just look at the painting again. By the way, I didn't tell you, this painting is one of mine and from a few years ago. And let's just see if there's anything else I can think of on the subject of overworking. So ridges can be a function of overworking, but if you don't have to get ridges. You need to, in fact, you have to learn not to make ridges. For example, if you wind up having to move this several times, or it came down and you had to reset it and you liked better what it was doing in the new version, you would want to move it. But if you misdrew it, whatever. But anytime you have a joint like that, you have a great risk of having a ridge. And in any place, you might have a line like this. If you paint it over and over again, you get a ridge right in the middle of a flat shadow of an atmospheric area, and you'll wreck the atmosphere if that picks up light in that you see that joint right there. So the look of, but that's again back to the question of the look of overworking. So one of the reasons that Gamel taught, he would make you walk up to your canvas at the end of the day with a palette knife and take off any ridges, because they're going to interfere with the next day's work, and they won't have the same physical unity, which is a thing, right? So sometimes you can see paintings by good painters in which it's so thick you think that, boy, this must have been a struggle. And so I leave it with that idea, though, that again, if it doesn't look overworked, what difference does it make, right? What is overworked? But I know what you mean. I mean, I presume I know what you mean, because we've all done this. Again, hang it on the probability that you're just painting from one end to the other, meaning the big important things to every single tiny detail. And it's very easy. By the way, one of the things you have to learn to do is to put a detail. And a detail, by the way, when you're painting a portrait, a detail is the eyes. You have to learn to put in things like that, wet over dry, in a unified way, or do the next level of form. If the head essentially is an egg for a bit, as you've seen my starts, then at some point you're going to be doing cheeks and parts of chins and all sorts of stuff like that. And you're going to, if you delay it in like I do and have it dry, that's always going to be the issue. And you can always paint the head out fully and bring it back in, bring the little forms back into that, or you can learn to do it without ruining the big form. But in every case, that's the stuff you have to get rather good at. How do I keep the major forms and the big color relations while I go pursue every little note, right? And that's the ruining can come from painting every little note and looking in to paint it and not looking at the whole to see what it is in context. And that's the great sort of lecture of Boston School painting, right? Everything is context. So I like that question. I'm working to think if there's anything else. I know that we don't need to belabor that, but if anybody else has discussion points that are more specific, it's very easy. I just do this without much setting up. I go to see if I have a picture like this that I can talk to you with. But so as I say, off the cuff. But by the way, and I could say one last thing, and that is that if you keep the visual order, you think it's overworked, and you go back and attack places because the painting is not in visual order. So you don't have the punch, the power of a spot like this, doing the right thing to a glare somewhere like this maybe, or to a light of the window, which is brighter yet, or these kind, and if one part of this thing is out of visual order as you're going further and further along, the probability is your entire painting is actually out of whack, and you're going to have to go back in after every little thing, which is, I should say, hence the reason we start the way we do. We're trying to actually establish, and this is the target the bullseye mentality, the target of the dart thrower, is preciseness, or precision, so we say, about certain areas like this and this. Some of them for exits, some of them for leading effects, for whatever. But each one of these things that we're using, here's some good exits down here. Each one of these things we're using, the more like we make them, and the more like we make them in relation to themselves, even in the preliminary phase, it'll set you up better. So you won't have to go into the painting attacking it over and over, just trying to get unity. If you look at the first 3 or 4 marks, just look at your colors, by the way. Set your colors out there and look at them and see if you can see the unity of your colors. What's your darkest dark notes? What's your most chromatic notes? And even what are the sets of the light? So just begin to see what that is. And those things, get them in their relationships in such a way, as Meldrum likes to say, that you could just transfer your painting over, even though it's not finished, just as a color scheme. You could see that it is that. This is that group of things, right? So the accuracy of the great relationships, you're always aware of it, you're always working toward it, which is really always, it's what I would think of as painting from unity. Having a concept of the thing as a whole, no matter if you're just making color marks. And so in that way, the refined target. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to get out of this one. I'm very pleased to have had it, Eric. Thank you for the question and discussion. And let us know. I want to say, by the way, virtually all my videos have been from your questions. So don't think there's a dumb question. There might be one, by the way. But don't worry. Don't think there's a dumb question. I mean, just that's one of those things you're horrified of looking foolish. Well, if you're right, you can write to me by email. The only person that's going to see you is me, and I work with people who think they're foolish all the time because that's what I was. I mean, when we're students, we know nothing, right? If we're wise. So don't do anything except just put questions to me, and I'm always on the edge of not having one, but so far you've done good. If I didn't have one, I do have a number of things to talk about, and I do build those in. Or I find something doing a critique with a student somewhere. But I really appreciate that you guys do that, and keep it up. Don't hesitate. In the meantime, thank you all for the usual, for the liking, the sharing, the subscribing. We're going up and up, and I'm really hoping, and I always see these really nice conversations, people thanking me. I'm still wondering how in the heck you guys stand there. Some of you say you do this while you're painting and listen to me. I doubt that I would do that. I would think that would be interfering with my painting, but I'm still pleased in a certain way. let's see, what else can I say? Yeah, but the whole thing, liking and sharing, is a big deal for us. So thank you, and we'll keep at it. I wish you well in your work this week, and hope you're going to put these things to work for yourselves. All right, next time.